Okay, so welcome everybody. I am Maria Horne. I am a co-director for the workshop, the Folger Weekend Workshop, and I couldn't be happier to be here. I'm forever grateful to Barbara for invited me to be part of this. I'm also the director for the UD Arts Collaboratory and the Working Artists Lab. And I want to acknowledge our wonderful group of students, both undergraduates and graduates that are here. You recognize them. They're all wearing the t-shirts, and they have been working hard to help us make this happen, but also they have been working hard, studying, preparing, researching, and meeting with pretty much everybody who's sitting in this round table to be part of the conversation that we hope will create closer links and propel us into the future. Because if Shakespeare is allowed to continue to contribute, we need to approach it from many different perspectives, from many different points of view. So thank you to the Working Artists Lab. Thank you to you, audience, Folger Workshop, Folger Weekend Workshop participants, guests, and everybody. The first thing that I would like to say, if I can get it in my phone, is when we convene this round table, we pose this. This is the title of a round table: Questions of Race, Class, and Culture in American Regional Shakespeare, Performance, Production, and Pedagogy. And we see this as a Shakespearean afternoon roundtable with members of professional and educational theater companies and organizations and schools who teach, produce, and perform Shakespeare, where we share and engage on these questions and the making of Shakespeare here in Buffalo, New York. In the email that I sent our roundtable participants regarding this event, um, I said that Barbara and I, we see this as a gathering of friends and colleagues joining in conversation to talk about Shakespeare in performance, production, and pedagogy, with focus on the word questions. We see this as an opportunity to share our finds and our challenges, our discoveries and concerns, as well as hope and successes. The members sitting here at the round table represent some of the not everybody in Buffalo, but some of the theater companies and schools are currently working on Shakespeare. This is not an exclusive club. It's just people that were willing and able and had the time to be part of this roundtable. But by no means we intend to exclude anybody. On the contrary. So I'm going to name, and if you were so kind to raise your hands as I name in alphabetical order, who are representing the different organizations. This is alphabetical. So Buffalo Academy of Visual and Performing Arts, the Central Academy of Drama from China, the Irish Classical Theatre Company, the Nichols School, the Peace of the City Theater for All, Shakespeare Comes to 716, Raices Theater Company, Shakespeare in Delaware Park, and Ujima Theater Company. So what we are going to do, we are a lot of us and we have a lot to say. We are all artist scholars. We are all love theater and love what we do with a passion. So I gave everybody 5 to 6 minutes to introduce themselves and discuss / inform some of the questions on race, class, and culture that they are, as organizations, confronted with in their current work. And additionally, I requested to please highlight the connection to their evening presentation, because all these organizations are going to be presenting tonight at the Ujima Theater Company. So without further ado, I pass it on to Barbara. So we can just pass it on to the first one, which is Connor. Connor Graham. Connor. So nice to meet you, Connor.
You too. Hello, everybody. Wow. I can't believe I'm starting this. Wow. My name is Connor Graham. I am a theater teacher at the Buffalo Academy for Visual and Performing Arts, which is also my alma mater high school. I'm so honored and delighted to be among so many colleagues and collaborators at this table. It's my first year teaching at Performing Arts since being back in town. And this is an interesting year to get into teaching. Teaching is and always has been a Herculean task. And when entering the teaching profession, at the tail end, maybe, perhaps, of the COVID-19 pandemic, maybe, we're being met at this interesting time with students who I find at my school, generally speaking, are viewing the world through apathetic eyes and who think of the word empathy as a bad word. Everything that's happened, not just in Buffalo, but across the country, with what seems like endless shootings, especially in schools, hate crimes, COVID, and everything else. Students are experiencing a world where every choice is a life and death decision. It's no wonder that some students are receding into apathy as a trauma response and as a form of self-protection. I asked the student who is going to be representing performing arts, a brilliant young woman who's going to be representing performing arts tonight, to choose a monologue, a speech that worked for her and that she enjoyed. And she came back to me with a speech from Richard II, which took me by surprise at first. And it's the speech where Richard says, "Let's talk of graves, of worms, of epitaphs." And she chose this speech. And at first I was like, what am I gonna do with this? And I said, well, why did you choose this? And she'll talk about this a little bit more tonight. But she started to talk about her relationship with death. And I'll let her explain more tonight. But I find that so many students are asking the question right now when I present anything in any of my classes, let alone Shakespeare, why does any of this matter? Let's talk about something real. And as I was working with this student on Richard II's speech, I find that Richard is asking the question, why does any of this matter? Let's talk about something real. And so Richard is giving my student the voice to express something that is so delicate and so heavy. And she does a brilliant job, and I'm excited for you to see her work tonight. So that's all I'll say for now. Thank you for having me. It's a joy to be here.
So, oh my goodness. We go to the Central Academy of Drama.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm so honored to be here. And this past 2 days, I have learned a lot. So maybe I will do my speech a little bit longer than 6 minutes because I want to try to speak clearly and so that everybody can understand me. But first, I just read, so it's easier for me to communicate with everybody. So I'm a professor of acting and directing at the China Central Academy of Drama in Beijing. I received bachelor's degree in directing from Academy. and received my master's degree from SUNY Buffalo. So I am lots of alumni for lots of people here. So I'm so honored to come back here. And I studied method acting with Professor Maria Horne. That time, under the guidance of Professor Maria, I have made it my mission since 1998. I told Maria I'm going to bring method acting to China, which I did. I translated and published the first book about method acting in China, Lee Strasberg's A Dream of Passion. I was a past judge for the Edinburgh Festival French Asia Arts Award, and I have attended and led countless international theater conferences and workshops in many countries. Let me talk a little bit about my academy. My academy is the headquarters of the Global Alliance of Theater Schools, we call GATS. It also serves as the base for the GATS International Theater Festival. The Academy holds the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, or UNESCO, Chair on Theater Education. The Global Alliance of Theater Schools, GATS International Theater Festival member schools include Germany, UK, Poland, Ukraine, Greece, US, Spain, etc. The Central Academy of Drama, my school, has 11 majors, including, of course, acting and directing, among others. To earn admission of acting to the academy, students have to pass 2 national exams. One exam is a major in-person audition consisting of 3 very difficult parts, that including acting, movement, recitation, vocal, and much more. The other exam is equivalent to the SAT in the US, but with even more pressure because we have so many people there. This past year, there were more than 7,000 students signed up for acting department exam. Only 50 were admitted. Many of the academy graduates have become world-famous artists, scholars, and writers who have made remarkable contributions. With a short of time, I'm not going to mention any of them. Regarding to Shakespeare, I should emphasize that the World Theater Education Alliance International Theater Festival is held on a regular basis at the Central Academy of Drama in Beijing. Shakespeare is always the star of the festival. At each festival, the organizing committee selects one of Shakespeare's plays as the main thematic presentation for each school. In the past, students have performed Romeo and Juliet, King Lear, etc. Shakespeare's plays are not only the stars of the festival, but are also the plays most chosen each year for doctoral and master's students to focus on for their academy entrance exam. Students are asked to analyze either the structure of the script or the character of the protagonist. Scripts examination often centers on the famous 4 tragedies and comedies of Shakespeare. For example, last week, acting PhD entrance exam include analysis of the character Othello, happened last week. And now, 2 senior acting classes have staged their graduation production of Hamlet and the Winter's Tale in theater that seats thousands. Talk about the Shakespeare in China has the first Shakespeare play performed in China was The Merchant of Venice since in 1913. Some of the most popular popular adaptations are translations into Chinese opera. In addition to the colorful singing and dancing, traditional Chinese opera attracts the audience due to its characteristic language. The language, traditional Chinese opera, is virtually the same as it was centuries ago. It was spoken or sung in old-fashioned literary expression, similar to Shakespeare's poetry. Moreover, Shakespeare's plays have universal appeal that is easily understood in Chinese culture. We share the same human values and morals, such as the need to punish the evil and promote good. We can feel the same emotions from Shakespeare. This humanistic side is the same in all of us. In this short introduction of Shakespeare's relevance at my school and in China and in Chinese opera, I hope you can see that his impact is truly universal, and it's not bounded by culture. Rather, it enriches all cultures. Thank you.
Yeah, Irish classical theater. Good afternoon, all. Is this on? Can you hear? How about now? Hello, testing, testing. Can you hear me anyway? Good afternoon, all. My name is Kate Loconti Alcacer. I'm the Executive Artistic Director for Irish Classical Theatre Company. It is wonderful to see this room so full. And Barbara and Maria, thank you for having me and Irish Classical here in the room today. Thank you. How about now? So, Irish Classical Theatre Company is celebrating its 32nd season. The company is known for producing Irish work, classical work, both Irish and non-Irish, and contemporary plays of exceptional merit. I'm in my third year as Executive Artistic Director, came into the position in July of 2020, so we all know that fun time in the world. And we are excited to welcome houses back into the theater. So in thinking about the presentation today, just wanted to give a little bit of background for the theater itself. I can share with you what our offerings are this season. So we produce 6 shows per season. We started with Doubt, which my colleague here next to me directed to critical acclaim. And then we produced Great Expectations, adaptation by Neil Bartlett. We produced The May, a modern Irish play. We produced The Tempest in collaboration with the Buffalo Philharmonic Orchestra, which was at the BPO. So it was an adaptation or a cut of The Tempest along with Sibelius' score, which was beautiful. We just, then we moved on to Thurgood Marshall. Well, one-man show called Thurgood Marshall. And then we will move on to The Importance of Being Earnest. So as you can see in terms of our programming, you might think with classical in the title of our company that we're producing a ton of Shakespeare, but in truth, we actually haven't produced many Shakespeare plays. Part of that, and just a little bit of the history here in terms of our theater community, we have a very rigorous live, outdoor, energetic Shakespeare festival, Shakespeare in Delaware Park, which I know I won't steal their thunder to talk about too much, but it was really respected and revered to not produce theater too much during the year so that folks were excited to come to the summer offerings for the city. So the company itself has only produced a handful of Shakespearean plays. This season we produced The Tempest, as I said, but a couple years ago we produced Hamlet. And I had the good fortune of directing it. My friend and colleague here, Rolando, played the ghost, and my other friend and colleague over here, Kristen, played Gertrude. So it's a small community. So this evening you will see a monologue selection performed by my husband and actor Anthony Alcacer in the title role of Hamlet. So he'll be performing Rogue and Peasant Slave. I won't give too much away, but maybe you know that speech. Another reason why I chose it is because his background is, he's Mexican. He comes from Mexican heritage. His father's from Mexico. And so when we were thinking about producing the show and bringing it into a modern context, it was important for me to make sure that there was cultural representation on stage, racial representation on stage in a way that that wasn't like fighting against what was happening in the story, but could kind of uplift it in some ways. And so as executive artistic director, it's really been important for me to look at these classics through a modern lens, to try to stretch our mission as much as we can, to think about conscious casting, color conscious casting, but also just representative conscious casting and what that may look like. I am still learning. I'm new at my job, and it's been a rigorous 3 years because for a year and a half of it, we couldn't really produce. And so it was a lot of reading and attending webinars. And so it's been really interesting to put a lot of that work into play for this current season and moving forward. So that is a little bit of what the company is about in this current moment and a little bit about our legacy. And I look forward to the conversation that will ensue. Thank you very much.
So we need to Nichols.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm Kristen Tripp Kelly. I am the theater teacher at Nichols School. And I just want to start by saying I connected so strongly with what you have to say, Connor. And I already had a moment with Megan outside where we ended up hugging each other. It's not easy to be an educator right now in secondary schools. It's not easy. We're crawling out of the pandemic. And we're just starting to take stock of what has been lost, the damage done, what has been stunted. And on top of that, let me just set the scene. So I teach at Nichols School. It's an independent school. It's highest tuition in the city. So I teach a very dramatic range of students. Those from the most affluent families, kids with the most privilege in the city, to those from the most underserved, underrepresented families. At my school, students are hyper aware of their identity in terms of class, in terms of race and ethnicity. And because we're coming out of the pandemic, they don't really have the communication skills to talk about it in a way that is healthy and productive. So I give you this prologue to let you know that Shakespeare has really not been my go-to for the last 3 years. It's not the easiest way for me to help my students. I've been leaning into student written work, student directed work, student devised work to try to center their voices and help them learn to talk to each other again. Thank you for hearing me on that. But that said, we have had meaningful experiences with Shakespeare at my school, both interpretations of full-length texts and our own adaptations, our original work. And I think in both contexts, the key has been working very intentionally with my students to build community. Because like Connor, I hear from the beginning, why are we doing this? Why him? Why the dead white man? And so I think the only thing we can do as educators is to throw that question onto the table from the beginning. Let's talk about it. Yeah, kick the shit out. Why? Why do we do it? And please, let's share with each other why you feel left out, why you feel like you can't access this material. That's a starting point. And then before I get into a text, I get the kids up on their feet doing acting exercises, loosely connected to the ideas of Shakespeare and text. So that's what you're going to see tonight. I'm going to demo process. I'm going to demo some of these access exercises as opposed to performing, because that is where we're at right now. We just got back on stage last year, all of us. Yeah. Thanks.
I can't sit down because I have a lot of nervous / passionate energy. So I'm Megan McLean Quatts. Do I need this? Not really. No. Please, yes. Okay. Okay, sorry. Okay. So Megan McLean Quatts, I have been the deputy director / theater director at Piece of the City for the past 21 years. And I just want to point out my team because I don't stand up here by myself. I am part of a team of Peace people. So wave your hand, Peace people. So together we are Piece of the City. My component of Piece of the City is a program called Theater for All. And underneath Theater for All is a summer production called Shakespeare Comes to 716. We've done 13 productions of stripped down, bare bones, gonna ride this horse hard for 90 minutes. Youth productions with kids from all over the city, middle schoolers and high schoolers, Black, brown, some whose English is their 4th language, English is their 5th language. We've had up to 14 ethnicities. We have gay, straight, transitioning. We are, if there ever was one, the representation of the kingdom that is coming. Okay? And I don't teach Shakespeare. I don't teach theater because I love theater. I teach theater because I am committed to do my little part in trying to save humanity. Because the practices of theater help us deeply connect with what is true about all of us. I am breathing my own breath. Nobody breathes me. And when I breathe me, I can see you. And when I can see you, I can start having a relationship with you that will affect and heal and impact our community. And we rise together, right? And Shakespeare has kind of come along on this journey with us. And most of the time, I am trying to beat the heck out of Shakespeare because he feels like the dominant culture, right? We're talking last night that maybe he's not. But what we're bringing into our classroom is white, is patriarchy, is religion, is all these things that right now we're trying to dismantle. And so what I keep asking Shakespeare, and I wrestle with him every season, is do you have anything to say today to Estelle? Do you have any words that are going to get through to Josephina? And sometimes it's a yes, and sometimes it's a no, like Kristen was saying. Like sometimes all we're going to do is just breathe together because that's what we've got. So this year and what you're going to see tonight is a mishmash. It's like kicking the ball to see what sticks, right? Like maybe this is going to work. Maybe this is going to work. No, that didn't work. I've been very humbled this year. I have young women who speak no English, a little bit of English, a lot of Swahili. I have kids that have been with us for a long time, but most of them are coming to this process completely new. And then you throw Shakespeare at them. It feels almost disrespectful. So what you're going to see tonight is a play space. We have tried to play with our bodies, with the text, with archetypal characters, because Macbeth has got all those archetypes. The evil, the good, the really crazy. And I guess that's all I need to say, right? Yeah. That's what you're going to see tonight. And when you come, clap uproariously for our students. No, I'm not kidding. That is how we are going to help save them, is when they learn that their fires can be lit by words and movement and language And when people see them, because that's what an audience is, right? You're seeing back to us the work that we've put forward. So clap loudly for all of the students that are up there. Thank you.
So Raíces Theater Company.
Buenas tardes. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Victoria Perez Mayolo, Artistic Director and co-founder of Raíces Theater Company. I'm just so humbled to be a part of this group, and I'm so glad that so many of the colleagues here on this table are speaking truth to something that I didn't think we were going to talk about. Right? So thank you. Thank you to all. Raíces has never produced Shakespeare. Never. Rolando is the co-founder of Raíces and my partner. He is a lover of classics. Is that correct? Am I speaking out of? Okay, good. I say when we produce Shakespeare, we lose the opportunity to produce something new.
Yep.
Right? But this is the balance between our partnership. The one thing that we know for sure is that everything we do has to be culturally specific to our experience. Specifically us, we're Caribeños, we're from Puerto Rico, an island in the Caribbean. And we believe that the more culturally specific we do anything, the more universal it becomes, right? Most of our readings have always been in Spanish because we love our language, right? And we are Latinos in the diaspora, en la diaspora. And that, by speaking Spanish, which is our native language, it's already in and of itself an act of defiance, revolution, because, you know, our native language, which is the Taino language, has been taken away, right? Through hundreds of years of colonization. So the language that we have now is Spanish. So anytime we get the chance to storytell in Spanish, we take it, we celebrate it, we honor it. And what you'll see tonight is a scene from Romeo and Juliet. Rolando and I are performing it. And just last night, we were sitting around the table speaking the words in Spanish and realizing the sad truth that we have to read it in English to understand it first, even though Spanish is our native language, right? Because the majority of our work is in English, because we are Latinos in the diaspora, right? So reading it in Spanish and getting about 60% of what's happening, right? Then saying, read it to me in English, realizing what it means in English, and then going back to the Spanish, and all of a sudden it's completely different, right? But also realizing that in English, you have the heartbeat, right? The dum, the dum, the dum, the dum. In Spanish, that does not exist when you read Shakespeare in Spanish, right? It's a Romance language, so it flows. There's tons of, you know, for 10 syllables, there'll be like 3 sentences, right, in Spanish. So it's a completely different flow, but in order to, because it was written in English, right? So in order to truly honor and understand what Shakespeare, what these characters, what the story is, we have to read it in English and then translate that, not only the literal words, but translate our thought process, knowing what it means in English. So it's kind of like double the work, right? But in a way, it only serves as a huge, huge aid, right? Because the level of our understanding in Spanish is greater because we have it now in 2 languages. Does that make sense? Right? Right. So that's what you'll see tonight. As we were doing it last night, we were like, this is exactly what we should do, right? Read it in Spanish, and then we stopped. We stopped rehearsing. We were like, okay, let's stop. Read it in Spanish, and whenever we feel something is not clicking, okay, what is it in English? Then let's do it in Spanish. And hopefully you'll hear the difference, right? Because it's a language, so it's all about what you hear.
And the reason why I'm a, such a fan of Shakespeare, even though, right, I am, my first language is Spanish, is because I worked at the Spanish Repertory Theater in New York City for almost 10 years, and we were doing a lot of the classical work in Spanish, and that gave me that sense of connection. So when I see Shakespeare, I see that it's universal and it has lasted this long because of that connection that we all feel we do have with each other. I started watching a lot of the in YouTube these videos about near-death experiences, right, that people have. And the main thing they say is that the first thing they get, the feeling they get when they go through that tunnel is that we all connected. We all connected and we're just not aware of it. So to me, Shakespeare, it's as we go and work and do an experiment to try to see if we can work it in Spanish and in English, and the difference in culture and the difference in the things that we're going to find that we can discover also in the Spanish is that connection to me. That connection that we can bring to the kids in the communities. That's the reason Shakespeare never dies. I always say that Shakespeare is like the Holy Spirit. It changes with time, but the essence is the same, right? And this and this experiment with Raíces taking this leap of faith, right, is going to be really interesting and very informative, especially to the kids. That wow, we can actually connect today in something that has been written so many centuries ago. So don't lose hope that we still have that connection and is going to help us be better people. You know. So thank you for allowing us to do this and to invite us to work here.
I feel like I'm in school when they're passing my talking stack, like waiting very patiently to share my piece. My name is Sean Crawford. I'm with Shakespeare in Delaware Park. We are one of the oldest free outdoor Shakespeare festivals in the country. We are actually modeled after Shakespeare in Central Park. Our founding director, Saul Elkin, who worked at UB for several years and worked at Shakespeare in Delaware Park for several years as well. He founded the company kind of under the guidance of Joe Papp. And so we've always kind of existed as a public theater sort of model. With that, each year we see about 45,000 people. We have 2 main stage productions in Delaware Park. So on any given night, depending on the weather, you can see between maybe 1,500 and 3,000 people. The 3,000 people is closing night of Romeo and Juliet, is closing night of Hamlet. The other nights, we still pack in quite a few people. We've done most of the Shakespeare canon, but there's still, I think, 5 or 6 plays that haven't been produced on stage. Following the pandemic, and as a result of the pandemic, we started a touring production. We visit 25 locations throughout Erie and Niagara County. We try to focus more on areas that have limited mobility. So whether this is elderly population with accessibility concerns, this is high public transportation areas, or lower sort of economic areas. So we have several inner city locations, several urban locations, several rural populations are often forgotten in these sort of discussions about under-resourced communities. So kind of going off of what everybody else is saying, where we kind of differ is we're less of the academic approach to Shakespeare. We're more about the communal gathering of Shakespeare. We like to think of ourselves as a public picnic where there just happens to be a Shakespeare production on. So we employ about 100 people, both backstage and on stage each season, doing our auditions early in June. But we also recognize that with what we do in our large audience base, and for many, we are one of their first employers as actors, we do have a responsibility to look at what we do a little differently. I think for years, we've kind of sit under this model of we're free, so we must be accessible. Anybody can see what we do, and anybody can experience what we do. Over the last several years, as part of the pandemic, but also a lot of kind of the recognition of Black Lives Matter in June of 2020, and this ongoing conversations that brought this workshop here this year, we're realizing that we kind of need to examine race, class, and culture through 4 different lenses. I'm an administrator, so my lenses are primarily staff and board-based, but we also have to look at what is represented on stage in terms of our artistic staff. How are we going out and recruiting our actors? What are we doing to provide tools for those that may not have had the same education experience as some of our more senior and veteran actors? We also look at through the lens of our actual communities. I would say our primary focus is who are we actually serving? So when it comes to these sort of discussions, I would say those are the 4 primary lenses, and we really have to think about inclusion in 2 ways. Are we, one, providing an opportunity where people can engage with our work? So this is us doing free Shakespeare that is also non-ticketed in several locations. But are we also creating an environment where people feel valued? I think that's kind of the 2 components of inclusion that we really need to be thinking about. With that, we also recognize that there are blind spots. Anytime you're looking at anything through any sort of lens, you're bound to have a blind spot. And that's why we've really been trying to reach out. We've been doing a lot more workshops in colleges, a lot more stuff in the high schools. We have a volunteer artistic panel now that puts out an RFP for directorial submissions. I think we had 25 submissions this year, so that we can bring new voices to our stage, understanding that as one of the largest theater companies and the largest free theater festival in Western New York, we do have a responsibility to put faces that are recognizable onto our stages so that everybody has some sort of equitable platform in which to present themselves.
Yeah, I'll start. So my name is, I'll pass it along because as you see, there are 3 of us here. So my name is Gabriella McKinley. I'm the program director at Ujima Theater Company.
My name is Brian Brown. I am an actor and company member and the managing director at Ujima Theater Company.
I guess I'm also an actor and performer too.
My name is Curtis Lavelle. I'm a company member of Ujima Theater Company for 30 years. And I am also a part of the staff now. And I am also a legacy of the late, great Lorna C. Hill.
So Ujima is celebrating our 45th anniversary this year. I don't know how much you guys know about Ujima, but Ujima Theater Company, well, the name Ujima stands for Collective Work and Responsibility. And that's how we operate. We operate as a collective, and we have our company members, right? And many, many more that are the foundation for our company. They are in charge of keeping our theater together. They are in charge of welcoming people to the theater, and our company members are also in charge of making sure that we operate on a day-to-day basis. And like Curtis Lavelle said, we were founded by Lorna C. Hill, who recently left us for the next life. She was an activist in Buffalo. She was an artist and a lover of beauty. So if you come to our space, you know it's beautiful and it's absolutely stunning. And we take great pride in being on Buffalo's West Side and being a haven of beauty on Buffalo's West Side, along with Piece of the City at School 77. So the work that Ujima does comes from a multicultural perspective. Our company is reflective of that, right? We have people from all different ethnicities, racial backgrounds, ability backgrounds, or we have people that come from all over Buffalo to create and serve art in our space. And that's something that we're extremely proud of. The stories that we tell aren't just our stories. We started telling stories from the African Americans perspective, but we've opened up to tell stories from a multitude of perspectives because it's that important. So if you look at our season, the stories range from stories like Church and State, which goes through gun violence and features only white actors, to stories like Colored Water that are talking about the water crisis in Flint, Michigan, directed by Curtis Lavelle. Right? There's stories in Flint, Michigan that features only Black female actresses on stage. And our season is as diverse and as covers such a wide spectrum as we do and as we choose to. Just to give you 1 second. So like I was saying, right, our multicultural perspective, that's something that we make sure to continue, and the stories that we choose are important. And that's the thing that we make the choice to make sure that the stories that we tell are meaningful and relevant to what's happening today. Oh God, took me a minute to get there. But that's huge for us. The stories that we tell aren't just for entertainment purposes. They are to make sure that the people that are in our community, that are in Buffalo's West Side, that are in Buffalo's East Side, that are in our Dunbar program, which I am in charge of running, right? It's our youth theater arts program, that those students are feeling seen. And whether that's from a religious background, from a cultural background, that they are being seen on that stage and eventually have the opportunity to perform on that stage and to tell stories that are their own. I'll pass it over to Brian as well to talk a little bit more.
So I guess the next question comes in of where do we stand with Shakespeare? We've only done one show that relates directly to Shakespeare, and that was the African Company Presents Richard III. If anyone knows that story, it is about a black theater company that is next door to a white theater company, and they're both putting on the same show. And they have the African theater company has more critical acclaim to the show, so it definitely shows the fight for black voices and the fight for black theaters to be able to have a voice and have meaning in the way of not just Shakespeare, but in their being able to present arts and culture in our own way, in their own way, which really relates and speaks to Ujima in the way of how Lorna C. Hill was an activist, not just for the company, not just for the creation of Ujima, where to have a haven for those who don't feel seen and heard and safe, having that safe space, but also in the way of what does that mean for the rest of our culture? What does that mean for everyone in the beloved community, which she spoke so highly of, in the way of what are we telling? What are we speaking to? What are we standing up for? Um, like the saying goes, if you're, what if you're not standing up for something, or if you're not saying something, what does that mean? What does that look like? So through our stories, again, we don't really reference um, Shakespeare or go to Shakespeare as um, sometimes being, and I can't remember who mentioned it, but Shakespeare being that dominant um, form of theater. Um, in our culture, it does make its way into some of our plays. There might be some references of Shakespeare and some of those tropes because it is a large part of theater. But like I was saying, our in relation to Shakespeare, it there are some pieces that we can find our voices in, but not always. We go to some of our writers in Black American theater history of an August Wilson, or some of those great writers that you just know of how their language is in speaking. So in regards to our piece tonight, I'll pass it over to Curtis. I think I had some more things to say.
Something really quick, Curtis, that's all right. Um, it's oftentimes seen that if you just put Black actors or actors of color, or actors from the global majority on stage, then you've hit your diversity quota, right? Or it's become inclusive. And we all know, right, that that's not the case. And the beauty of what Curtis is going to perform tonight is that it's beyond just being a Black woman on stage. It's the story being told, right? The story being shaped around her perspective, around her story, her own uh, her own her own cultural story, her own personal story.
Yes. So this evening I will be doing a scene from Macbeth. The three witches, they are having a conversation. The scene starts with "Where hast thou been, sister, killing swine?" I decided to do it alone. I play all three witches. And my inspiration was that I come from and know much about mental health in the Black African American community and how much of that we keep to ourselves. And I let this be my opportunity to express what it means to be someone who is working through those kind of feelings, someone who is undiagnosed, someone who is diagnosed. What is the possible machination of the mind that is working with multiple personalities? I come from a family of multiple personality disorder, and it immediately felt like my opportunity to express that part of my life that I haven't always had the ability to express. Also, I am a huge fan of a challenge, and this felt like the right kind of challenge. Um, my mother would always tell me that her Shakespeare was Mark Twain. So we didn't do a lot of Shakespeare. We did Pudd'nhead, and that was her homage to her beloved Mark Twain. And we read a lot of it. She shared it with us around the company as a part of some of our ethos and cultural feeling, because Mark Twain had a wonderful understanding of Black folk, and he had a way of bringing himself into that culture without feeling like an anthropologist. Um, and that was very inspiring to my mother, because she believes in Guerrilla theater. She believes in a kind of work that brings everyone together, collective work. She spoke of her community, which was, as far as her eyes could see, as the beloved community. There was no community that she didn't believe was beloved and worth fighting for and worth talking about and bringing the attention to. So that meant white folk, that meant Black folk, that meant brown, yellow, everything in between, the whole rainbow of people. And then the spectrum of all of those people, LGBTQ, the impoverished, the rich, all of those, because all of those stories are important. You don't know, sometimes you don't know who you are in that story until you see it on stage. And then you become inspired to do something. Like Maya Angelou said, once you know better, you do better. And my mother was a believer in that. And what's a better way to show you how to do better than to be on stage, to show you through art, to inspire you through art. Um, so yes, I am very excited for this evening, and I hope I do it justice. And my brain is a very brilliant thing. um, yes, I'm very excited. I'm very excited that you're coming into our home.
Well, I am thankful to all of you to being here and also for being so open and to share what we agreed on is the questions, the concerns. We do not have the answers. We do not have the solutions. The concern that I have has to do with gatekeeping. I think that Shakespeare today acts as the gatekeeper that is keeping a lot of people from accessing it. And I'm not talking just from the literature perspective or the English classes perspective. I'm talking from the performance perspective. And it goes beyond race. It has to do with class. It has to do with culture. There's many barriers that are keeping people away. So no wonder we need to turn away somewhere because there's no way that we're going to squeeze through that door. There's no acceptance. There's no place for a lot of us in Shakespeare in America. So Barbara is here, and she's exactly an example of multilingualism. I am multilingual. Many of your students are multilingual. Raices is multilingual, and I'm sure many of you are multilingual as well. My students are multilingual. Why do we perform Shakespeare in English is a question I have. Is Shakespeare just English language? Well, I can tell you that that's not what the world thinks. And in the world, there's many more people speaking other languages other than English. And yet there is a connection with Shakespeare that's very strong. So I have that question. Why is it that some of the most beautiful, I have worked in 28 countries teaching and lecturing, and also being a judge, a performing arts judge, and many other things. And some of the most beautiful performances I've seen of Shakespeare, meaningful, uh, with depth, were not necessarily in English. That is not to say that the ones in English are not wonderful. They're wonderful performances in English, and there's horrible performances in English as well. But I want to pose that question because Buffalo is like a little world. We have many communities, but if we look around in the audience, even if we look around in this table, we're not all represented. And sometimes, even if we are represented, we do not feel like that door is open, or we do not feel like this is something that we should be doing. So I have those questions for myself, and for everybody else. I think having an accent in the United States and do Shakespeare is a no-no, right? So for me, from the beginning, to perform Shakespeare, even though I have performed it in other languages, has been a no-no, regardless of my talent, regardless of who I am. So there is the multilingual problem that the United States is dealing with. The vast majority of the population in the United States, and we're going to see this in the coming years, is going to have an accent. So how do we deal with these problems? These are some of my observations. I'm sure that all of you have observations in the classroom, in the theater companies, with the board members that you have, with recruiting actors to who is prepared to do the work. And I do not have the answers, but I have the questions. So right now I'm going to pass the mic to the members of the roundtable if you want to talk, and to the audience if you want to ask any questions. I would ask one of the Working Artists Labs to come, members to come and grab the other microphone, so the questions that the audience may have reach us. Okay, anybody who wants the mic?
I think it's when we realize, right, that the world that the United States is changing to where a place where accents are commonplace, and they should be, right? Then we're going to have to shape the story and shape the story to those people. No longer should people have to shape themselves to fit into this story, into this perspective, to this very closed, this closed imaginative. The imagination needs to open so that people can, so that the story can be shaped to people rather than people having to shape themselves to this story. And that's going to be our, I believe, our number one tool in making sure that everyone is seen on stage. So making sure that these stories aren't just for the white gaze, but for everyone's gaze and for everyone to appreciate, or even just for the Eurocentric gaze.
I went to performing arts along with Connor Graham, along and Brian Brown. I started giggling before I could say who else I went to performing arts with, and Brian Brown. And I don't know if they had the same experience, but I know I can speak to, as someone who never came, as someone who only knew Shakespeare before performing arts as, you know, literature that you kind of read. I love Shakespeare as poetry. I'm a fan of his work like that. It's strictly that. It's love song on paper. It's not anything else. By the time I got to high school, and my mother was very much like, we don't do Shakespeare. And by the time I got to high school, they were teaching Shakespeare, you know, as a fundamental. I was not a theater major, but I do remember being in some of those classes and overhearing some of my fellow classmates speak about Shakespeare as if he himself had created a language, as if Shakespeare is like Spanish or like Chinese. You know, it's got its own language, and it does. So then, you know, if that's where you're starting in the conversation of Shakespeare, then naturally, well, if it's in English, then the only way to properly do the work is in English, which we all know now, or have always known, and is speaking out loud. That is not true. Um, it is only work that is documented in a time that was immediate to his experience. And when we look at it like that, just the bare bones of it, then that means any experience can be filling in the lines. That is the coloring book that is Shakespeare. Anything can be in the lines, and it's just as honest. Othello can be anything. Macbeth can be anything, and it's just as honest, because, like Gabriella had said earlier, it's about your experience. It's about who you are. It's about seeing this experience and recognizing the parallels. Like Megan said, it's about seeing the mirror of Shakespeare in you. I was working on Macbeth, and in this scene, and I was trying to figure out how I'm going to devise these people, change, you know, make it so that you can feel these three different people in one entity. And then I realized that's not what this is about. That's not my experience. My experience is a tick that changes the conversation. My experience is being in a room with multiple personalities and it changing that fast. And it doesn't always have a different feeling. So that is immediately the thing. I think that's really why we're here, right? So yeah.
I just wanted to continue that conversation, Gabby and Curtis. You know, coming from a school, you know, when I went to acting school, I can't believe I'm saying when I went to acting school, it came out of my mouth and I was like, who is talking? Who is that lady? in my experience, you were taught to leave yourself out the door, right? You have to just go with the masses, right? And always feeling wrong, always feeling, not authentic, always feeling like I'm trying to hide myself and hide my experience, right? Because I went to school here, right? I went to acting school here. And through, the years of working, coming to the realization that as an educator, my number one responsibility when I work with students in the global majority, from the global majority, bring yourself to the role. Bring yourself to the story, because if you're in it, it is your story, right? And honestly, a lot of our cultural history has been erased, right? So when we do that, we speak the voices of our ancestors, right? So like when Rolando and I were working last night, we automatically, just like instinctively, started to translate the old Spanish translation into Caribbean Spanish, right? Because we were bringing ourselves to the characters. And that, of course, I talked about a level of understanding even deeper once we start to speak it from a Caribbean perspective, using, language and phrases and, colloquialisms that are specific to Caribbean people. So it's so important in the work that we do to not continue, not perpetuate the erasure, right? But bring ourselves to the stories. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. I know at least most of you on a first name basis. I'm Riley from the UB Arts Collaboratory this semester. I had a question. We were talking with Lisa Ludwig and Brendan Didio when Shakespeare came a few weeks ago about helping actors and designers and everybody involved with the production tell their story through theatrical work that they're doing. Do you have any, this might be a very big question, and each theater company might have their own answer, so that's totally fine, but through your experience, how would you say, is there a way that people, maybe whose story it isn't to tell, can be a strong ally or can allocate that space to people so that they can tell their own story? So me being a white man, being in a production of, I don't know, The Color Purple, obviously would not be, appropriate, but is there a way as an ally that I can still be involved with such a wonderful piece of theater and allow people to tell their own story through that? Do you have any, I know it's a super broad question, but if you have any advice, I'd love to hear it.
Thank you for that question. Just going from, again, experiences and my experience, to answer that question, I would say take it down to the bare bones. For example, there is a devised theater piece that Ujima put together in the 80s and just recently in 2017 called Free Fred Brown. That is a story that was a true story of a company member who went to jail for theft of services. But throughout this community of people that are affected in this show, everybody has their own story. So taking Shakespeare down to the bare bones and finding those pieces that are completely universal, because as much as we want to talk about Shakespeare in it being a classic, and going back to it being spoken in English and in just the way of, when you start to change Shakespeare, I feel that some, and this is just, again, my personal experience or feeling, that those productions of Shakespeare that are a little bit more ethnic, that are out of English or allude to a different culture other than the European centric culture, that is looked down upon. And why? When, again, the Black characters or the brown characters are usually, pegged as Othello or in The Tempest. But when you take it down to the bare bones of some of these stories, they're all the same stories throughout every community, throughout everything. I think we've experienced some of those things in being in love with two people at the same time, having those stories of disguising yourself as someone else to play to class, to play to um, just culture. It's finding that story and applying it to you to make it authentic. No, you can't, fake it on stage. People can tell that. Like Victoria said, and just fundamental that Lorna Hill gave me as an actor is you have to find those pieces in yourself to make it authentic. If you're not putting yourself, to me, just if you're not putting yourself into the story, it's not authentic. People can tell that it's fake, or it seems like you're watching somebody on stage and it's like, oh, this is acting. That's great. It's supposed to feel like you are in the room with them. It's supposed to feel like that you can experience that. So I really think it's taking it bit by bit, and as a just because we're a collective, we know where all of the experiences lie, and it really is addressing the truth in the stories that everyone has to tell, not just yourself. So figuring that out for yourself and then sharing that vulnerability with the rest of the cast, the crew, um, the whole production.
I'm going to try to connect that and the language thing. There's tons of barriers to doing Shakespeare, right? That's why we're all here. We're talking about the barriers and the things that are wrong with this guy and how hard it is. It's really hard to translate into Spanish. It's near impossible to translate into Swahili, is what we found. My girls are like, there's no word for this. There's not. So there's barriers. And one of the things so I'm not a lover of Shakespeare, but what I've found is that Shakespeare really loves us, right? Like he really loves human beings. He is like falling all over himself in that Hermione monologue. And he is just lavishing us as humans. So maybe the reason to keep doing Shakespeare is that he has unearthed things that are true about us, regardless of hair color, old, young, graying or not. He just keeps loving on us. And that's common no matter what skin color you're wearing or how you're feeling about yourself today. I think that's what keeps me coming back to it. And what is really fun about having young people do it, because they get that. They're like, oh yeah, I know what it feels like to be in love. I've been in love more than anybody else in the whole world, right? So I do really love that about the Shakespeare experience is he's a lover.
But to the conversation of allyship, I would say that, what's beautiful about Shakespeare, I think why he gets a lot of play, as my brother would say, is because there are tropes. He is some of our first immediate work, popular work that expresses trope. We know what an ingenue is. We know what a hero is. We know what an antagonist is. We know what protagonists are. We know what ensemble. We know what a different idea of a Greek chorus is, because the idea of oracles. There's always a part of Shakespeare's work where something is telling you about the future of what your choices will mean. I like Shakespeare because he's great for consequence. And consequences aren't bad or good. The word broken up is with sequence. Like you chose a thing and this is the next thing that happens. In the way of allyship, I would say that the more that we can do work where we are honest about who's in our community and what we see, is the more opportunity that we can let everybody in the room about it. Shakespeare is wildly isolated. Even when people of color are involved, you're usually kind of like brought in from a distance. You know, you're not always with the team that is doing the Shakespeare work. Once again, that whole thing that Gabby was speaking to about, you got to fulfill your diversity quota, and in Ujima, we don't have a diversity quota. We are the diversity quota. So all of our work is immediately about that. But I would say in the way of Shakespeare, the more that we can do his work and know that it's just honest to let it be anybody, the better.
Oh, sorry, is there another microphone? You got it.
In the audience.
I was just.
Yeah.
There are a couple of questions in the audience.
Yeah, they.
Just observing that the first question was about performing Shakespeare with an accent. And we were just told an hour ago that there was a time when 75% of the people in the city did not speak English as a first language. I think it's still a pretty high percentage. I think a very large percentage of the city speaks specifically Spanish as a first language. We were also told that there was a time when it was very, very common for actors to tour. Didn't you just tell us that? Yeah, to tour the country speaking Shakespeare in other languages. And that these performers felt pressure then, Janacek, we were talking about this before, felt pressure to take a year off of her career. She was told that she needed to, and she was performing opposite Edwin Booth. This was not some fringe thing. She was doing Lady Macbeth opposite his Macbeth. And she was told, take a year off and learn it in English. Well, what's the message there? I think that, talking about who's performing it, I'm really, really interested in who is in the audience. And that's really my interest now as well. I don't do what you do, I am in the audience. And I see who else is in the audience. And what English has meant in this country as a place that was colonized, or as a place that was fought over by people speaking French, Spanish, and English, and the English being the most barbaric one. And that language coming from that country has a specific meaning, and the meaning is we're better. And that Shakespeare is the ultimate recognition of that. I notice in teaching, my students have all heard of Shakespeare and heard him in English, but they do not know Molière, and if they have, they've heard him in English. They don't know Calderón de la Barca, they don't know Lope de Vega, they know nothing of that, the great writers of the same period of time, and they don't know them. And in terms of how to be an ally, it's very interesting when a place is, you may have noticed I'm white, and you may have noticed that Barbara Bono and I have exactly the same accent.
Middle Atlantic, right?
We are both
Born in Poughkeepsie.
We are both born in Poughkeepsie, and you grew up. Actually, I was born in Cold Spring, and you grew up in Putnam County.
I did indeed.
Indeed.
Yes.
It's a certain.
I'll tell you about that wild weekend.
Well, it's a certain kind of white, and it's also a world in which, to be included, to come into my world, you can't just knock on the door. Not me personally. You have to be brought by someone I know. And then no matter who you are, what you look like, well, okay, that looking for an ally, and I look for Shakespeare and an ally in the city. I think the most important person I know, and this is, what kind of town this is, if you're not from here, 3 of these people are my students. 2 of these people I just spoke about on the radio this morning. It's that kind of town. But I think what Shawn Crawford has done for Shakespeare in Delaware Park as an ally for race in this city has been unparalleled. That's right. And he's white. And also when you were talking and you said the white gaze, the black, I thought you meant GAYS. That's what I thought. Because I thought, oh yeah, that's true. That's true. We have done this. We have the boundaries mean something different to us because we have partially been cut off from our own people. But at any rate, that observation, and I'm kind of interested to know your thoughts about your audiences and the diversity of your audiences. So that was a long way to a question.
If you don't mind, I'll just kind of jump off of that real quick. Thank you. So I think one of the ways to think about an audience, especially with Shakespeare, where there seems to be so many barriers. I mean, there's language barriers, there's actual tangible barriers, but there's also sort of mental blocks. I'm somebody that grew up that would have thought Shakespeare is something I could never go. I never went to Shakespeare in Delaware Park before I started working there. And I remember the first time I sat at a performance and I'm looking around and you could hear a pin drop. It's 9:30 at night. There's the first show I saw was Love's Labor's Lost, and it's toward the end. The princess, she finds out that her father had passed. Just silence. And I'm looking around. Everybody is. It's not that everybody's having the same experience. It's that they're sitting in on the same experience. What's going on in their heads might be completely different than mine, but it was fascinating. And I think that kind of the underlying theme with that is that Shakespeare, the text is always going to get in the way. And as language evolves, that older language is going to get farther and farther, the divide's going to be deeper. What you have to look for are those kind of underlying values. So when it comes to, let's just not say audience members, but also people on stage, if you want to bring new people in, the most popular model has always been you attract people that are similar, you select the ones that most line, and then there's an attrition. That's just what happens. If things don't work out, that's when you see people leave companies. There's people that don't work for certain theaters. That's where you see audience members. If they're not engaging with their work, they're not going to come back. And then an opposite approach to that is you can bring people in, but you have to do some sort of onboarding process. And I think one of the things that I've been proud of is with this touring show, we go out and it's more of an education component. It's saying Shakespeare is something that you can enjoy. These are the underlying things. If you want to come back, you can come back. We can provide more resources. I see several theater companies. Jim, you have your Dunbar program. Burlesque Travel has a fellowship program. I think Irish was doing a program for young artists too. It's another way to bring people that may not have had the same experiences. Hold a second. But I think a lot of the conversation has to start with not just the what do we do? It has to start with those underlying understanding of what are those barriers? What are the conversations behind, the problems? If we're all on the same page about the problems, it's easier to bring a group together to come to a solution. Whereas a lot of what you see is everybody says, this is the best way to do it. I'm going to do it. And then it's patting on the back. I love that Gabby had said something about this diversity quota, because it is something that you see on stage where I think there's something inherently good about seeing yourself on stage. Without a doubt, seeing somebody that is like you, that you have never seen before on stage, is an inherently good thing. The problem is when that actor is put into a position to represent somebody that maybe they're not comfortable representing. Why should you have to be the token spokesperson for who you are? I mean, it doesn't make sense to do that. And sometimes it involves, well, like I said at my beginning, it's blind spots. So when you do something like that, are you opening the door for other actors? Or you already pigeonholed, this is the Black actor that's going to play this part? What does that do to the 50 other actors and actresses that have gone up through the ranks and are working their asses off? And they're never going to get on stage because that quota has already been met. So I think I kind of went on a tangent, but I think goes with the allyship. Identify your blind spots, have those conversations, especially with communities. It's easy for me to say, oh, 45,000 people come to the Hill, we're free, we're accessible. The fact of the matter is, if you can't walk through the park at night, you're not coming to see our show. If you don't speak English, you're probably not coming to the show. I mean, you might enjoy a picnic and seeing, the spectacle that's on stage, but there's a lot of other barriers beyond just financial means. And I think a lot of that has kind of been teased out. And it's interesting when it comes to this idea of race, class, and culture, kind of the underlying theme of it is a sense of community. Where are these pockets of community? And I think it's okay sometimes. If you want to hold on to the community, there shouldn't be a need to say, you have to be part of what we do. But there should be an effort to say, like, be part of this. Let us bring you in. Let's make you feel valued. Here's an opportunity. But I think that understanding that the centralized community is really what's kind of, I think, more important underneath those three sort of different tiers. But
I am a direct beneficiary of all of this. I was working in New York City, as I mentioned, in Spanish. But even there was a lot of resistance within the Spanish-speaking community that if you if you go to an audition and you have an accent, they will not pick you. Period. And I was in New York City from 88 to 95. Then I consider myself very lucky because I came to Buffalo. Because Buffalo was opening up to actors of color. They were opening up for actors with an accent. Uh, I mean, even though, for example, Ujima, give us our first break when I graduated from Bus State. So it's very welcoming, this community. And we could serve as an example for the rest of the nation. Because, for example, I realized I was living in South Buffalo at the time, and my cousins had exchange students from Europe. 4 students, 4 female students in high school. Each one of them spoke 4 languages in high school. And then I'm comparing that to United States. Why is it that we have a country in front of us in Canada which is bilingual? You have countries in Europe that speak 3 or 4 languages. Why is it that we can't? So some of those barriers exist, and little by little, by doing this work, we might be able to break down some of those things. Like even in Spanish, like for example, I was traveling in the subway in New York City, and there was this Latino guy, and I just arrived in New York City, so I didn't speak a lot of English. So he was about to kill somebody, right? Because they say something. I didn't understand what they said. And as after the whole, fire was up, yeah, yeah. um, I asked him, what's going on? And he said to me, trying to speak in Spanish to me, even though he's a Latino, but he has an accent that tells me Spanish is not his first language. But he said it in such a way that inspired me, because he said, "Oh, they were saying that Puerto Rican people have no heart," but in that accent in Spanish. And this guy, who barely speaks Spanish, was so passionate about his culture, even though he didn't speak the language. So it goes beyond language, and that's what inspired me about Shakespeare and the classics. Is that when you do this kind of work, you don't know who you inspiring to do a little bit of more research, or to become more, hey, I want to become a bilingual person, and breaking down those barriers that exist in our society that we can only speak one language. So I think I've been considered myself very lucky, because I've been working in a lot of the theaters in town, but it started with my first English production at Mala Mancha de Cavenoque, and going to college and all this stuff, and then working with different theaters and giving the opportunity to perform these pieces of great theater in Irish classical, at Ujima. It's incredible. And as an actor, it feels to me like we are on our way. Talking about, inclusiveness, talking about, being an ally, that's what it does to people like me. So thank you.
Thank you, Rolando, for those wonderful words and for that optimistic outlook, because we all need it, we all want it, and we all want to work together. And I want to thank you all. We are out time, but I invite you to continue the conversation, because this is just the starting point. It was an opportunity for us to meet together and start the conversation, and for you to get to know us a little better, and also to continue the conversation with us. We have a lot to learn. We have a lot of questions to ask, but I am very optimistic about the future. So I'm passing this on to Barbara so she can close.
You'll see these people again tonight. So let me thank everybody around the table. Almost everyone you see here came week by week to the Working Artist Lab course. So they mastered the UV parking lot, various weather conditions to get us ready for this. We appreciate it so very much. This is a kind of middle phase where we were able to gather together. Tonight, we'll be able to begin to act together. So again, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Maria, for insisting on and finding the means to take this thread, very important thread of this workshop forward. Let me remind you again of restaurants in the area and to make sure you've got a ride. Let's see those hands again. Who has faces? Yeah. Oh, yes, and right, and yes, and yeah. Right, just comes up to talks to us. And again, remember, Mother's Day is coming. The earrings are lovely.